Greetings, everyone. This is Families of Virtue. I'm Thomas McCuddy.
I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And today we get to have the conversation about instilling the virtue of wisdom over the desire of success into our children. And I would like to start out, Thomas, by asking how important is it for us to actually want to pursue wisdom before we try to instill this into our children?
A big part of what we teach is that you can't give what you don't have. So, as parents, if we don't live wisely, if we don't have that wisdom, then we can't pass that on to our children. And even the idea of wisdom is often confused. People sort of associate it with doing the right thing at the right time, which that is practical wisdom. But we also refer to wisdom, the Greek word is Sophia. So we might distinguish Sophia wisdom almost like we would distinguish like agape love. Like that's that special like love that comes from God that, without him we wouldn't know that kind of love. Sophia wisdom is that same kind of wisdom. It's the kind that comes from God. It's being able to see everything through that lens of God's creation and the way he sees things. That kind of wisdom, being that kind of person, is where you are best suited to understand truth, goodness, and beauty, because you have that almost the mind of Christ, what Paul talks about. We have that mind of Christ. That's that true wisdom. We have to be the kinds of people who cultivate that, becomes part of our thinking, rather than just having to. You can't flip the switch. You have to be that, and then what happens is your children will see that. People will see that. They will recognize that you're not like the we think of sometimes like the guru on the mountain. Like we think the world kind of shows that as wisdom. That's not what it is. It's just kind of the wisdom that, wow, there's a depth of understanding that comes from having the mind of Christ. And if we cultivate that, that's what we want to pass on to our kids.
So that type of wisdom is talked about in Proverbs 3:13 through 18. And it reads, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding, for the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called blessed." That's from the ESV. So it compares wisdom and all of the earthly riches that we desire on this earth. I'm just going to kind of throw the question out there. The idea of desiring success and pursuing success, is that evil or negative? Because I want to make sure that as we talk about wisdom over success, that we fully understand where we stand on both of these concepts.
I wouldn't consider it evil per se. I wouldn't say that, because we should be part of who we are. We need to garner some form of success, and especially in the home. I mean, we want to go and we want to be able to procure income and have a family and eventually buy a house or something like that. So the problem is when I believe, because if you went to any curriculum, whether it be in high school curriculum or a college curriculum or whatever classes are available in a degree program, you don't see this type of class being taught. Number one, I would say that it probably can't be taught that way, or maybe not completely, but we tend to send our children to school and they get taught all the different things that make them successful in kind of the worldly sense, which is not bad, but there's a missing component that just sending your kids to school, they're going to miss this. So what do we do about fulfilling that role in our children? How do we, I would say it's kind of like finding the missing piece, the missing component in our children that we see kind of in the fruit that they're bearing, because you can be very successful in life. You can make like millions of dollars or rand, but then not actually be a good person. And you come to the end, and you see this in Ecclesiastes a lot, where Solomon's talking about all the different worldly successes that he had and the wisdom he gained through these worldly means, and that everything at the end of the day is just vanity. So what remains? What really do we need to? We want our kids to grow up to be complete and human beings. What do we need to add to that just equation that just sending them to school is not enough?
Well, and I think even using the Ecclesiastes, Solomon makes that point too, that he had sought all that knowledge, and he calls wisdom, all the learning. And he said even that too was vanity. So I think this is why our emphasis with virtue is so critical, because there's always virtue is that middle ground between excess and defect. And we're talking about two things. We're talking about success, we're talking about wisdom. So we defined wisdom, but what happens is we often don't define success. If success is determined by a dollar amount, then that's where, again, if you make millions and millions, then you are successful because it's only been measured by a certain quantity of money. But if we consider success as more of a quality, that's why this combination of wisdom and prosperity, doing the right things the right way, that that there is a sense, if you're really bad with money, for example, you're not really wise. It's hard to call somebody who's absolutely terrible at the things they do a wise person.
Right.
So I think there's this balance that we know it's more than just profit margins and having the kind of career with all this upward mobility. We tend to define success only in those very, very concrete terms, but we don't include in there that idea of the character that's been developed. And I think this is why, as we think about with raising our children, it's easier that if they get into the good college, they get into the good schools, and they have the good grades and they have the good jobs, we can take that and we can say, but that's success, isn't it? And if they are a person that, and this is why so many people who, I had read it recently, that the companies that are most likely to suffer from like fraud, embezzlement, and as a company to do things that are illegal are the really, really rich ones. They're not the small companies. That it becomes, if you don't have this character to back that up, even that, whatever that material success you have, you're not going to be the kind of person who can even handle that. It's almost like what happens in America when people win the lottery.
Yeah, it's just that.
It ruins them most of the time. They don't even know what to do with that success. I mean, that's pretty cool. You went from like a normal person to all of a sudden now you have, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And they don't have the character that can even handle that. And I think the message we try to get out to parents sometimes, are you developing, are you growing the kind of child that with whatever prosperity they encounter, they are the kind of person who can handle that well, who can thrive, whether they have bounty or whether they have little.
So when we have these conversations, I want to make sure that, because right now in my Sunday school class, we're talking about family as a whole, and I just want to make sure that our entire focus here isn't just about little kids and how we raise them, but I don't have little ones around. I got little grandkids around, but I don't have little ones. But I wrestled with this concept 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, you were around when I did that. I was successful, had a stupid paying job, to be honest with you. Fantastic company, fantastic coworkers, but honestly, I was just miserable because it wasn't what I was pursuing. And now I'm doing construction as well as pastor, but I'm doing construction, and I get to drive a skid steer all day and listen to philosophy books and seek wisdom, and then poor Thomas has to hear my skid steer thoughts or my tiling thoughts, or he's like, "What are you reading?" But it's been such a transition for me to go from what society and culture would call success to now just this life where I really do get to pursue wisdom on a regular basis. But I did it later in life, right? I did it after my kids were grown. So does that still have the effect on my family that I would hope it does?
Well, I think with what you're mentioning, there is this aspect that when you embody wisdom and you embody what a good life looks like all the way around, that whether you've got adult children, whether you have neighbors, whoever they are, there's a sense people benefit from you. And that's why I think the concept of success is larger than just working for the big company, because you obviously help the company. But when you have somebody in your life or your neighborhood, whoever it is, and they embody that idea of Sophia wisdom, just like somebody who embodies agape love. you will see that, and you become a blessing to everyone around you. And I think where the challenge, where particularly with families, and we think about with teenagers, so not just little kids, even the teenagers that are in high school, we have this mindset of they have to make the certain grades, they have to do the certain things, play the sports, all these. And even as they graduate and they go into adulthood, oh, they have to have the career and they have to do this, and we want this for our children. But even in my life, my undergrad degree is mathematics. Okay, so people just assume my children are going to learn calculus. That is not on our agenda. And I said, if they learn calculus or not, that's not a big deal. Like, it's not about, can I advance them, and how are you going to prepare them for college? Our mindset is that they're going to be prepared for college by being the kind of person who loves to learn.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a wise human being.
Yeah, that's a totally different.
It's very, very different. So they might not have all the information necessarily that someone else does, but they're going to be the kind of person that can quickly and easily gain that later, versus the people who've gotten all that information and then they go in, but they put it to bad use,
Right.
or they don't even end up using it. Like the number of kids who end up having, or even the adults who know and have these skills, but they're not the kind of person who can put them to good use, because that wisdom is what's required to know how to take who and what you are, the skills that you have, and direct them the right manner. And so that's why even in working for a big company, I mean, this is a thing I think every child who grew up in the late 80s and early 90s saw, like with all the movies, is you had the parent that was like always working at the company and they were never involved because we've got to make the money and the big deal is going on. And the movies push back on that, rightly, but they never really identified necessarily what the counter was.
Yeah.
What right looks like.
Yeah, they just, right is actually attending my T-ball game rather than closing the $1 billion deal. And that always, it just didn't seem to balance. I'm like, wait a minute, something else is missing here. So as we seek to, whether it's to raise children or even like in the case of adult children, I know I have a lot of parents who come and they say, well, I feel like it's too late. My kids are already gone. I'm like, but it's not too late. Because even at my age, in my mid-40s, having the men and women I can look up to, having the people that I can look and I can see they have something I don't, and I want to be around them, that to me, that's the success. It doesn't have to be like the whole idea of working for a multi-billion-dollar company. Like if somebody does that, I'm like, that's neat, but is that it?
Right.
And so but to have somebody, even if they are, in terms of socioeconomic, if they're poor, but I see a life that's really lived well, that's in many ways what we're defining as success, the total package of the life. And as we seek to instill this in little, middle, or adult children, the parents have to understand this from the inside. You can't fake this. We there's a lot of things we can fake. You can't fake wisdom. Like we can recognize that, because there's a sense that it's the quality again of who you are and your heart. And I think this is something parents, I think, first have to wrestle with that they may have never considered. They might be chasing that pot of gold rather than actually pursuing wisdom. And I think that's the challenge. Is we want parents and we want men and women to really broaden that understanding, because it's not just going to be the kids, it's going to be your whole community will benefit from that.
So in defense of those parents, I'm going to ask you a question. In defense of those parents, I think many of them are often trying to provide for their children something they didn't have. And so I don't think it's out of ill intent, malice. I think it's truly them many parents trying to better. But so often I think we are missing this component of wisdom. And so...
Well, and I think when you're saying that as well, missing the component of wisdom, yeah, because our generations, we want to, in a sense, we want them to have an easier life or a better life than we had. Like that's kind of the goal of being a parent. But what does that mean? Is it like just with material things, or is it with just having the money available in the home, or like these things? Because I realize too, like if I take away the difficulties that I had to strive to overcome to get to me to the point where I am right now in my journey of being like Christ. If I remove that from my children, they're not they're not going, because part of growing in virtue is overcoming obstacles, and I believe that part of being a Christian is to overcome obstacles, to see how you get through trials. So in some ways, we do our children a disservice by taking every impediment out of their way as they're trying to grow. Because I see that with my own children. Like they get to the point where you realize, because you're trying to be a good parent, you want to be attentive, and you want to make sure that your children are happy. Then all of a sudden you realize that you're just like kind of waiting on them hand and foot, and you're just like, what am I doing? They need to be able to do this, because what happens if God forbid I pass away, or my wife, and they're stuck on their own or doing whatever. I recognize that they have to be able to take care of themselves, and in order to do that, they actually have to overcome some difficulties.
Okay, so I think people are going to hear this. They're going to hear a bunch of guys that spend time in college and have letters after their names, and like for the blue collar type, and all the way through those that have spent many years at university. Can we talk about the difference between knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge and this idea of wisdom that we're talking about right now?
Well, and I think that's where in doing the math degree and going to seminary and pursuing the acquisition of knowledge and data,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's often associated with the education. And that's why, having done that, I can say that filling my mind with information did not make me a better person,
Right.
at all. And even doing something like mathematics, I mean, that's almost mathematician is almost like magician with just a few words. And like people feel like I'm doing some sort of dark arts with the math, and it was math. It was theoretical mathematics. I mean, it was research based, and so it's very, very impressive. But at the end of the day, it does not make me a better human being. It did not, because my purpose for it, the reason I went into math was because so few people did it. It was kind of a job security. I knew that if I go in and I do something not a lot of other people do, even if I'm just tutoring, if I'm just tutoring math, like you always need math tutors, you can't find them.
I bet you were just a blast at parties.
I was, but for reasons we'll get into in other podcasts. But anyway, so when I did this again, it was more or less financial. It was that sense of success. I have something I can do, whether it's teach, whether it's research. And so having done this, I can say at the end of the day, it was actually quite unfulfilling that I get this degree and I'm like, this is it? Like what am I going to do now? And God called me into ministry and I shifted. But I think for so many people, if they almost see education as and that training as the means to the better life.
Mm-hmm.
And they think if they go and they get the letters, they'll have a better life, they'll be a better person. And what we're seeing a lot in our world is it's actually doing the opposite effect.
Yeah, for sure.
They're getting pieces of paper and they're walking away terrible, because the school systems many times have actually perpetuated bad ideas and philosophies and worldviews that we'll talk about. We would take many moons to talk about all the stuff that goes on there. But this is why when we're thinking about from parents and taking this all the way back to kind of what Thomas had talked about, with they want to give their kids what they didn't have. The wisdom is giving the kids, giving your family, giving your neighborhood, whoever it is, to give them a good life, to give them that which is truly good. So in terms of your own family, it's not just about, well, I didn't have these toys, now they will. I didn't have these foods, now I will. Because like I said, it ends up becoming you do damage in the process. That's not wise.
Mm-hmm.
We know that as nice as it would be to lay around all day, that will wreak havoc on your body over time. The same is true with your spirit and your character. that if you don't have that challenged and pushed, you will not grow. You will atrophy in your character. So I think with parents, this is why they need wisdom, and to cultivate that themselves is to know how to achieve that with their kids. That we know we don't want to wait on them hand and foot. We know that we don't want to just lock them out of the house and, in 3 days, let's see if they survive. And, will they learn great survival skills? Well, yes, if they survive. But that's not to be clear. So to go back to anyone who's listening, don't do that to your kids. Okay, adult or not. I think, again, it goes back to what are our goals? What do we understand what is the greatest good? Do we understand? Do we have that vision of that? Do we ourselves pursue that? Is that truly, is Christ likeness our measure of success? Because if we're like Christ, there's a sense we will prosper in what we do, because Jesus was not foolish in how he worked. He was a blue collar worker. He was a carpenter, which in that day was actually a stonemason, most likely. And so we see that in his humble state, here's Jesus of all the things he could do, and he worked with stones.
Yep.
And most people are like, well, he could have done so much more. He didn't have to. That wasn't. Again, it goes back to he knew what he was called to do, and that was only for a time.
And so it's important, because I want to make sure everybody understands that it's not about your station. This idea of pursuing wisdom is not about your station in life. Mm-hmm. It's not about your education level. It's not about all the knowledge you have. Those three things can benefit you, and they can also detract from you depending on where you are. But it's really about this idea of the pursuit of the true, good, and beautiful, that life that you are, preparing forward. Just for a practical side, how have you, T-Quack, how have you pursued wisdom in your life?
Well, it's funny because, Thomas and I, we started the ministry together a few years ago, and these things all came on my radar. And then kind of coinciding with us starting ministry, I started homeschooling. And so I'm not the typical homeschool, because I'm leading it, and usually, typically might be the mother who leads the homeschool. But we have a different situation. And when it comes to these, I realized when I was in that situation, just me and my boys are 13 and 12. And I'm realizing now when it comes to them, whatever I'm doing is going to be reflected for good or evil. So I have to, because there's no excuse, there's no blaming the teacher, because I'm the teacher. There's no blaming somebody else for their behavior. And I recognize that there's something that has to change in me. And I say this to everybody, because this is that missing component we're talking about. And how to, even as with adult children, or, because even imagine you went your whole life and you lived the one way, and then all of a sudden in your 30s, you decide to change. You have adult children, they see that.
Yep.
That's important too.
So I just want to make sure. So it's the reflection of your children.
It's
really
kind
of what has shown you.
Yeah, it's really just recognizing, because I'm seeing the things in them that are reflecting back on me, and what do I need to learn? What do I need to do? How it's not just I can't fake this.
All right. So that's helped you pursue it.
Yeah.
So the last one I want to close us out is, wisdom and success are not exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive in any way. And so there was a story that you had shared a little while ago that I'm going to ask you to share again, and just kind of closing us out for today.
I think what sparked this whole thing, it's a fable about two woodcutters. And so as it goes, an old story recollects two men were chopping pieces of wood. First man labored hard and steadily all day long. The second man also worked hard, but every so often would stop and take a break. While on his breaks, he would call out to the first man and say, "Come and have a rest. I want to show you some things that will help you." But the first man would say, "Not now, I'm busy. I don't want to lose any time." That productivity there. By the end of the day, the second man had chopped far more wood than the first man. This was a surprise to the first man, because he was sure he had worked harder than the second man. So he asked, "How did you do it? How did you cut more wood than me?" And the second man replied, "Well, every time I stopped to take a break, I sharpened my axe." Goes back to Ecclesiastes 10:10. If the axe is dull, the one who does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. but wisdom brings success.
Thanks, fellas. This is important, I think, in my life and probably everyone who's listening's life. So I would urge those that are listening to, if you haven't already, pursue wisdom in your life. And if you don't know how, find a mentor that can guide you and lead you and support you through it. You can find us at familiesofvirtue.com. I want to thank you for joining us, and have a blessed day.